Hi, and welcome to another GDR Objectified Field Trip. Today we find ourselves in Guben, a town on the German-Polish border in southeastern Brandenburg. During the GDR period, specifically from 1961 to 1990, Guben was known as Wilhelm-Pieck-Stadt Gubin, a title it bore because it was the hometown to the first state president of the GDR, Wilhelm Pieck. After the Wende, this name was removed, but as we're going to see, there are still significant traces of that era to be found here in the town.
Well, I guess that I will never...
The first we come across are two buildings. One housed the city's SED office, and the other the city administration. Here, on this corner, in this abandoned building, done in the national construction tradition, sat the district leadership of the SED. Over here sat the town administration, just in case the two had anything to talk about. Interestingly, the town administration building today is home to Dr. Gunther von Hagen's Plastinarium. This is the gentleman, the scientist who has managed to find a way to plasticize human bodies. Gubin really blossomed economically in the 19th and early 20th century when a number of company owners working in the area of textiles put down roots here in the city. A lot of the very impressive neoclassical and Jugendstil architecture that we see in the downtown comes from that time. But it's also the reason why, when the SED was looking to put industry here, they decided to go into polyester or Dataron production here in Gubin. The area had a tradition in textiles. In GDR times, Gubin was a town of 37,000 residents. Its population has since fallen to 15,000. This is a result of the fact that the main employer in the area, a synthetic fiber factory, closed its doors just after the Wende. The factory was built in the mid-1960s and at its peak employed 8,000 people directly, with all of the related spin-offs, of course. It produced over 40,000 tons of chemical fiber annually and was a key part of the East German industrial landscape. While the plant shut and its component sections were farmed out to private owners, there is still a permanent exhibition on the history of that plant here in the city, and we're going to go check that out now. Presented by a local club dedicated to keeping the history of the plant alive, the exhibit is housed in the city's administration building. On my visit, I was fortunate enough to have a tour from Arnold Zosna, a local resident who was well versed in the history of the plant. One fascinating tidbit I learned was that Dataron, the GDR's much ballyhooed synthetic fiber, was in no way original, but simply the same recipe as nylon, renamed to avoid copyright infringement. Who knew? The exhibit also includes ample examples of the products, fibers that the plant created, and the products that these were used to create. So, textiles being a very popular one, but there were some other ones that I was less familiar with. For instance, did you know that Guben was one of the leading makers of fishing twine? The plant's history as an R&D center is not given the short shrift, nor is the history of the plant's cultural side, social side. This collection of brigade diaries is amazing, and there are copies of the factory newspaper, The Voice of Friendship, with its 3-language content, a tip of the hat to the guest workers from Poland and Vietnam. My favorite anecdote, however, had to do with this hall. Built for the factory's women's handball team, one of the country's best, its construction was originally prohibited by district party bosses from Cottbus, who wanted sporting facilities to be concentrated there. The factory leadership was not to be deterred, however, and they put in a new application, this time for a canteen for the workers, which just happened to be built in the dimensions of a handball hall. They used it as a canteen for a couple of years and then converted it. Only drawback, there were no seats for spectators. So the GDR era imprint on the Guben cityscape really begins west of the center of town here on Karl Marx Street with this cinema, which as you can see is no longer in use, and then this nicely renovated apartment block, also in the national construction tradition. So this is a school just off the Karl Marx Street that used to bear the name of Guben's most famous son, Wilhelm-Pieck, and it had been my understanding that there was a bust of him still here at this site. However, I guess this visit has been a bit of a bust. Just down the street from the old Wilhelm-Pieck school, and driving down Friedrich-Engels Street, during which time I crossed Rosa Luxemburg Avenue and Karl Liebknecht Avenue, I'm beginning to get the feeling that not so much had changed up here. But this square here is actually kind of interesting. This is now called Remembrance Square. During the GDR period, it was Liberation Square and dedicated to the memory of the Red Army soldiers who had fallen defeating the Nazis. And it used to feature a T-34 Soviet tank, which apparently disappeared very rapidly after the changes in 1990. It now has these large boulders and a number of plaques, and it's dedicated to victims of violence and war generally. So a little less of a clear relationship to any one conflict, but an interesting view into the sort of post-Wende psyche here in Guben. So there are two main motivations why I came to Guben, and one of them is behind me here. This is a cement relief by the artist Jo Jastrom from the year 1970, and it graces a building that used to hold the polyclinic, or the medical facilities, primarily for the workers of the People's Own chemical fiber work, excuse me. It's a remarkable piece. It is divided into three sections. The top would be recreation. So we have a soccer player, dancers, musicians. Then we have labor and politics in the middle. So we have a demonstration with the red flags, workers demonstrating other acts of labor. And then at the bottom, we have family life. So we have a family, mother, father, and child. And then we also have the work, which is also at the center of the life. It's a remarkable piece. It graces the entire gable of this building. As you can see, it has 3 dimensions. Some of the figures extrude up to 30 centimeters away from the wall, so it's quite an unusual piece. Really glad I was able to get out here and find it. About 15 years ago, when I went back and did my master's degree, I wrote a final thesis on the way the city of Leipzig and its residents dealt with the manifestations of the GDR in their public space. And as part of my research for that, I went and had a conversation with the guy who was in charge of historical protection for the city and talked to him about all these myriad of ways the GDR was in the public space, and the way there seemed to be a rather systematic effort to eliminate virtually everything. This fellow was from the West, which was not unusual for administrators at that time, and he explained to me that he saw his job as protecting those objects for another 20 years so that a sober conversation about them could take place. The debates at that time were very ideological, and it made it hard for people to step back and really assess the value of objects, names, etc. I came to Guben because it's a rare example of a place where the debate has actually taken that next step. We're going to head to a site now that illustrates exactly this. So, since the city bore the name Wilhelm-Pieck, it was only suitable that they have a Wilhelm-Pieck monument. And in 1976, this one was inaugurated in the new estate district called Sprücke. Now, what's interesting about this is that most monuments of this kind throughout the former East have been removed. Anyone too closely associated with the party was in ill favor after the Wende, and those sites were destroyed. This one was not. I think part of the reason might have had to do with the fact that Pieck was a son of the city, and had a very good reputation compared to many SED functionaries. He was largely seen as the kindly grandfather type to Walter Ulbricht's hardliner. So I think there are a couple of factors there. The other thing that happened in the case of Guben was that the city simply didn't have the money to tear the thing down initially, and they had a very difficult time mobilizing a majority on city council over the years. When the question came up again for debate a couple of years ago, things had changed. There was a new voice at the table, and that was from the generation of East Germans who were born between 75 and 85. So GDR by birth, but not socialized, and certainly didn't live through much of the oppression that their parents had. For them, this site was part of the history and something to be acknowledged and not simply erased. And so it was. The money was found, the site has been renovated, and we have a wonderful example of a good, a conscious, engaged way to engage with a contentious historical past. The monument itself is quite interesting. Designed by Gerhard Thieme, a favorite of the SED and a master student of the renowned sculptor Fritz Kramer, it is visually divided into three parts, a form which unmistakably recalls altar triptychs common to the Christian tradition, a somewhat unusual form for a socialist piece of art. There is, of course, a profile relief of Pieck at the top of the central pillar at the front, but flanking this, and on the back side of the monument, there are a number of other bronze tablets featuring scenes from Pieck's life and times. There he is alongside Ernst Thälmann and the Weimar-era Communist Party, scene of the liberation of Germany by the Red Army at the end of World War II. The founding of the SED, Pieck's was one of those two famous hands, and then also scenes of his time as state president, beloved of the people, presiding over a prospering socialist society. It also features a quote from Pieck in 1950, "We all want to live in peace, and peace is a right of every people." When the Wende came to Guben, the Pieck monument was where the demonstrations happened. Note the apartment buildings in behind. These have all since been removed due to population loss.
Our last stop here in Sprucke. Here a bronze statue entitled Discussion by Hans Eichwerth. And behind it, the only high-rise in the city of Guben. Housing for single men working at the chemical factory.
So this seems like a good place to sign off this GDR Objectified Field Trip to Wilhelm-Pieck-Stadt, Guben. Thanks for watching. I've had a really interesting time here today. I find that on these trips, I'm seeking out sites that I've read about, heard about, and that was certainly the case today. But I've also learned a lot of new things. So I hope you've enjoyed this trip to the German-Polish border region, and that you'll stay tuned for the next GDR Objectified Field Trip. Thanks for watching. Tschüss.
Well, I guess that I will never learn, but you've shown me actions speak louder than words, and you've shown me. Introduce me as an old friend, don't call for weeks upon end. You think by now that I'd be used to the cold light of day. Around you still I hover, a planet undiscovered, waiting for the day you train your telescope my way. Oh well, I suppose that's just the way it goes. I know that you don't want to, still I'd like to see you try. Hear my silent plea, spare a moment for the meek. It isn't very likely, still I'd like to see you try.